I was so close. I was the next person, and Maurice is like, sorry. And I was like, so I can't get my book signed, and I've been waiting for 20 minutes. Nope. So hopefully over the reception, but about a book now. 17 minutes. If you're going to $5,
Dirty boys don't stand a chance against the big boys right on vacuum cleaner. 440 horsepower of pure shore torque. With a detachable spot remover that absolutely annihilates. Appliances have an Energy Star rating of F-, which is zero on gas. So man up this holiday season and ask your boy to buy you GE Big Boy Household Appliances.
Wow, how'd you get it so clean in here?
GE Big Boy Appliances.
Y'all gonna end up unemployed riding around in this pouch. Jump, look, and walk 16 miles. Oh, back and forth. There are a few women working in space program.
At least I can do is give y'all that support.
3 Negro women chasing a white police officer down the highway in 1961. That is a God-ordained miracle.
Teenage astronauts will be here for training. They should be doing in space. It's never been done before. With the launch of the Russian space station, the president is demanding an immediate response. This is about it. With that, I'm not going.
It's John Green. Calculating multi-millions. How would you think I am in Spanish? They say equal rights. I haven't read this before.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna have to. Make that pencil move as fast as your mind does. Every time we have a chance to get in here, they will finish it. I just been that from here to here.
Then these walks, so much.
You certainly are the boss. You just have to act like one. So,
Together, we can work it all. Finalized meeting. We'll find Catherine.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aww. My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
I mean, run fast as you can.
So do you think you just insulted your sister?
No. Insulted girls, not my sister.
Is like a girl a good thing?
Actually, I don't know what it really, if it's a bad thing or a good thing. It sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like you're trying to humiliate someone.
So when they're in that vulnerable time, between 10 and 12, how do you think it affects them when somebody uses like a girl as an insult?
I think it definitely drops their self-confidence and really puts them down because during that time, they're already trying to figure themselves out. And when somebody says, you hit like a girl, it's like, well, what does that mean? Because they think they're a strong person. It's kind of like telling them that they're weak and they're not as good as.
And what advice do you have to young girls who are told to run like a girl, kick like a girl, kick like a girl, swim like a girl?
Keep doing it, it's working. If somebody else says running like a girl or kicking like a girl or shooting like a girl is something that you shouldn't be doing, that's their problem. Because if you're still scoring and you're still getting the ball in your time and you're still being first, you're doing it right. That's not what you say. I mean, yes, I kick like a girl and I swim like a girl and I walk like a girl and I wake up in the morning like a girl because I am a girl. And that's not something that a champion should do. So I'm going to do it. That's what they should do.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like a girl.
Maybe that's a chance for you.
Pardon me, please. Yes, I love my dad.
I have no.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. How many of you saw the station? How many of you saw the station today? Hello? 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 Okay. So CBS
firefighters, and so on. And I think this is a perfect day to start this panel discussion with an applause for all the women. Okay, so my name is Marie Larcher-Mele, and I'm the Protocol Officer at ACT. And I have the distinct honor today to be the moderator of this amazing panel of speakers. I'm going to start off by providing each speaker an opportunity to introduce themselves. And Dr. Adams, I'm going to start with you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming. So I'm Stephanie Adams, and as I said earlier, I'm the Dean of Engineering Technology at Old Dominion University. I was born in Norfolk, right over at Norfolk Centera. It was actually Norfolk General way back when. I attended the Old Dominion Child Development Lab for kindergarten, so in a lot of ways it's been a full circle moment for me. I watch the little children passing by my window every day as they're going to and from. I would consider myself an education brat, so my parents were university administrators. My dad was a university administrator, so we lived here until I was 11. Then we went to upstate New York and then out to Indiana. As early as I can remember, Dr. Darden, you and I had this in common. I wanted to be a physician also. And I had the perfect plan. I was going to be an OBGYN, and my cousin was going to be a pediatrician, and I was going to make a lot of money. And somehow at 7, I figured out that the pediatrician would treat children until they were 18. So if I delivered them, and he treated them until they were 18, we would see the same families over and over again, and we'd make a lot of money. So that was my plan at 7. In 10th grade, I injured my knee playing basketball, and my dad was, at that time, been working with engineers and advocating for students to go to graduate school in engineering. So a lot of magazines would come through the house about engineering and biomedical engineering and chemical engineering, and I got shipped off to every summer camp for engineers that was in the Midwest. So I used to think that my parents didn't like me in the summer, and that I would go to Purdue for 2 weeks, and Wisconsin for 8 weeks, and I'd go here and there. But actually, it was a very rich experience. And so I learned about engineering, and I set my goal to become a biomedical engineer, to attend medical school, and get to do an MD, PhD. Along the way, some things changed, but I spent a lot of time working at 3M in the Twin Cities as a new product development engineer. So I worked on everything from artificial shoulders and hips to braces to carbon electrode devices for heart monitoring, sandpaper. So 3M was known for their coating, so at some point you're going to do something in sandpaper and videotapes. But it gave me an opportunity to think about the design process and what's involved in designing new products. The innovation back then, 3M was known as one of the most innovative companies in the world. To understand the role that everybody plays in the innovative process. And as a result of the work that I did, I really started focusing my efforts more on quality control, which is a major part of any design process, and that you're actually building and producing what you say you want to do within specification. So that's how I got into that body of work. Then I decided, I went on to become a faculty member at the University of Nebraska in industrial engineering, and I did that. I never really saw myself as an advocate for women and people of color, because it just, quite frankly, it was always, just put your head down and do your work. And if you're a faculty member, that's the cachet, the result of your putting your head down doing your work. But of course, who I am, by nature, you get invited to do things that other people wouldn't necessarily get invited to do or speak on behalf of others. I think the most impactful moment for me was in 2005 when I was asked to write a book chapter on the experience of African American faculty at predominantly white universities. And when I wrote my chapter, several of us went on a little speaking tour, and we started talking about the representation of people of color and women in the professoriate. And at that time, there were 16 full professors that were African American women in engineering. And so as someone who was aspiring to become a full professor, the fact that there was something like 20, plus thousand engineering faculty and only 16 people were women and African American women, I needed to start doing something about that. So over the last 10 to 12 years, most of my work has been around advocacy for women and people of color to be included in the conversation, to be at the table, to be encouraged to pursue STEM degrees, graduate degrees, and also to go into leadership positions. Because if you're not at the table when decisions are made, and resources are allocated, it's really hard to make change. So I'm really happy to be here today to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Well, I covered most of it, but I didn't talk a lot about my family. I am from Monroe, North Carolina. My mother was a teacher. She taught me in a two-room school. She took me to school with her when I was 3 years old. And it was out in the county just south of Charlotte. And she told me I could play with the other kids. I said, well, there are no other kids to play with. Everybody's in the class. And so I stayed in her 1st through 4th grade and did the 1st grade work, and she promoted me to the 2nd grade. And so then I went to school in Monroe in the 2nd grade. One of the stories she told me when I was about 5 years old, she gave me a talking doll. And she said, I was a little disappointed, Christine, because you didn't play with that doll very much. You cut her open to see why she talked. So that might have been an indication of what I would really enjoy doing. I'm the youngest of 5 children, but the 4 of them were pretty much together. So by the time I was 8 years old, they had all left home, and so I spent 5 or 6 years with my parents alone after they all left, because I was the youngest. And I think that's kind of about my family. I've got 3 daughters, I've got 5 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. I retired from NASA because my youngest daughter called me and said, aren't you going to go on and retire so you can come and help me? So I went to Colorado and helped her. That's kind of my story.
Thank you. General Whitecross has come all the way from Rome to join us today. Thank you very much.
So I'm just going to tell you a little bit that's not in my CV. I come from a very traditional family in Canada. My father was in the Air Force, sergeant when he retired. So we lived in a number of places across Canada. Yep, that's right. And I went into engineering. Now there's a little bit of a story as to how I got into engineering. So when I was in school, I had 3 older brothers and a younger sister. And when I was in school, I worked hard at sciences because it kind of came naturally to me. My grade 9 science teacher on the Speak to Your Parents night. Back then, kids weren't allowed. It was just the parents and the teachers. And my grade 9 science teacher told my father that I should go into engineering. My father came home and told me, Chris, you're going to be an engineer. And I said, I don't want to drive the train. Because I obviously didn't know what an engineer was. So he made up my mind that I would go to Queen's University and become an engineer. He saw the camaraderie at Queen's. For those of you who are Canadian, know that Queen's is a little bit, it's a very good school. They have a tremendous social part to it. And so the decision was made up for me. Went to Queen's, and as I was walking down the street one day, walked into a recruiting center and said, I think I'd like to join. And it was as simple as that. And within 30 days, I had signed on the dotted line because they had an Engineer Get Well program going on in the Canadian military, and they had just opened up the Canadian military engineers to women. And of course, I didn't know any of this. I just joined because that's kind of what I wanted to do. And what isn't in my CV is when I didn't tell my parents I was joining the military until the day I was being sworn in. So I called them up. My father had already just retired. And he didn't say much. And then I went to speak to my mother, and she wouldn't even talk to me. And it took me a long time to come to grips with that. My father ended up, he was very proud of me, but he was just a little shell-shocked. But my mother was very disappointed. She was just, and I found out a couple of years later that she really wanted me to be a kindergarten teacher or a nurse. Now, if you know me, you would probably say, your mother didn't know you very well, did she? But the reality is that I wasn't going to be a kindergarten teacher or a nurse, and I was into engineering, and it took a little while, but at some point my parents, who are the biggest fans of my life, really came into my side. I went into engineering. I joined the military. Again, there weren't many women doing that, and so it was pretty difficult. But with perseverance and a whole bunch of other things, things just came into play. A couple of really big watershed moments in my career, and they were humbling, to say the least. I deployed to Bosnia, as you heard from General Sakti. I also deployed to Afghanistan. And it was in those moments in Bosnia and Afghanistan where I realized that I come from a country, Canada, that may not be perfect, and equality may not be where it needs to be. But then I realized that, boy, I live in a great country. And I realized it because I ended up in my free time, mostly in Afghanistan, but also in Bosnia, to work with women's groups and children's groups. And I worked with a couple of schools, particularly in Afghanistan, one for developmentally challenged children, and the other one where they were trying to have boys and girls in the same class, up to grade 12. And also worked with some volunteer women's groups. And it was at that moment where I realized that the nations are not created equal. Women are not necessarily treated with dignity and respect the way they should be. And I came back to Canada realizing that I got to do something about it. Go forward a couple of years, and I had the opportunity. I say the opportunity because at the time I didn't think it was, but in hindsight I believe it was, to lead the Canadian Armed Forces effort to eradicate sexual misconduct within the military. Another watershed moment for me, and something that actually I felt in my entire being, and it hurt my entire heart. Of an organization that I grew up in during when I was 19. I grew up in, and there were people in there that didn't necessarily treat women well. And so I get three fairly distinctive time and place watershed moments for me to realize that if I could give back one thing in my years in the military, it would be to try to do as much as I can to mentor, to shape, be a part of the decision-making cycle that actually helps women, helps the gender dialogue moving forward. Oh, sorry, I have 4 children. They're kind of important. I have a stepdaughter and 3 children of our own, and you know, the really nice part of it is they're all doing something in terms of service. Police, teaching, one of them works for the federal government on diversity and inclusiveness, and it makes you feel good to know that your children are doing something for society that is good, and that is good for the generations to come. And I also have 2 grandchildren, 2 little boys. They're great.
Now, last but not least, our very own Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Paul Bennett.
So, if you haven't spotted it already, there is a distinct difference between me and the other panelists, and that, if you haven't spotted it, I am genuinely the only person to say I really don't like geometry. I'm sure I would have liked to become an engineer, but just to follow the line, but maths, physics, and chemistry are a bit of a mystery to me, so I clearly am not. I have been in the Navy, the Royal Navy, the UK Navy for 34 years. I've had what we would see as a fairly normal warfare officer career, which had the enormous privilege of commanding various ships at sea and sailing around the world doing what the Royal Navy does. And that has been a huge pleasure and a huge privilege once every year. I joined the Navy 6 years before we allowed women, or we welcomed women at sea. So we had women clearly in the Royal Navy, but women were not allowed to go to sea until 1991. I joined in 1985. So the first 6 years or so were all male ships. And then I worked with the Navy for, I think it was probably 10 years, where we struggled to adapt our culture. It's very easy to change something and let women go to sea, for example, welcome women to sea. My goodness, it takes some time to change the culture, and I felt that was enormously instructive, and we might be able to explore that a little bit more in the panel discussion. And I have had the privilege of commanding mixed ships, male and female, at sea, and without a doubt, they are far more effective. I fundamentally believe that than we were when we were all male. I have latterly been responsible for the diversity and inclusion policy in 2 big organisations in the UK, and am now, as you've heard, responsible for the staff in what I would see as the most diverse organisation I've ever worked in, which is Allied Command Transformation, where 29 nations of men and women, of air forces, armies and navies, plus NATO civilians, come together to help the alliance set itself for the future. It is enormously stimulating, but with the cultures that come together. But we still have lots that we can do. My reason being on the panel is that I am a passionate believer that everyone should genuinely feel valued, and that everyone must feel that their voice counts. And I will do everything I can in this job to ensure that that's the reason. And I think that is the only way we become innovative, by really valuing them. It's a delight to be here.
Thank you for your introductions. You all had amazing careers, proving that life is actually a personal journey. And when you give 100% of yourself, you grow in dimensions you could possibly not imagine. Dr. Darden, you come from a family of academics. Could you ever imagine that one day you would be working for NASA and pursuing a career in a man's world? Tell us some of the obstacles that you faced to get you to where you are.
Well, no, I could never have imagined that one day I would be working for NASA. That answers the first question. But I did have a propensity to like to work, what makes things work, and working things like that. So I did enjoy that, and as I realized that physical science and math was what I really liked. And as I was taking the math classes, I was always started noticing that I was learning how to solve problems in sort of the front of the chapters or the front of the book, but we never got to the place where they told you what these problems are used for, what they apply to in the real world, and that bothered me some, because I really did like to know why they applied. And when I went to NASA and the engineers would bring equations into the room, there were 1 or 2 who would actually explain this equation is going to calculate such and such, and they would explain what it did and what it meant and things like that. But a lot of them would just bring an equation and say, solve this with these variables. And and I had no idea what went with it, and found that extremely unsatisfactory, and maybe one of the reasons I wanted to leave the office. So so no, I hadn't envisioned, but I fell into the right career because I ended up absolutely loving what I fell into. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
I think your comment brings home to what Archie was about earlier. Explaining something to you makes you feel valued. And that's really important, is to value each person that you're working with and make them feel included in the project. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head by bringing out that was one of your major obstacles. You were not being included to the final product of what
That's
you were
true.
working on.
That's true.
Dr. Adams, you are the first woman and first minority to be the dean of the engineering school at ODU. Tell us some of the obstacles that women and minorities face today.
So I'd like to break that down just a little bit. So when we think about it from a K-12 perspective, they're very different at different stages. So from a K-12 perspective, women and kids of color are often steered away from science and math. Even today, you'd be surprised that the number of women, kids of color say, well, I was told I'm not supposed to be good at math, or that I can't do math, and that I can't understand math. And so that's an obstacle. I think the other thing is that in the same space, we don't have enough people who are properly trained to teach math and science. So even the kids who might be predisposed to do math and science, they're being oftentimes taught by somebody who's not capable. So it starts early, and then it gets perpetuated, and by the time they get to college, so now I'm a college student and I've decided I want to be an engineer, but maybe I haven't had the right preparation because I haven't seen role models, people that look like me, that have been encouraging to me to be prepared. And then in the classroom, there's still, in 2019, a subset of the population that just doesn't think people that look like me belong. And so then you're questioned in the classroom about not only your place in the classroom, but your competency. And so, we talk about what are the challenges. If people are constantly looking at you like, why are you here? Or are you properly prepared to be here? Can you offer something and contribute? Then that causes a challenge and a problem for others. So it also begins to wear on your self-efficacy. So, you may be the strongest person and know that you're capable, but if everybody around you is constantly questioning you, then at some point in time you begin to question yourself. That becomes another challenge. And also I think I'd add, at every stage, the role models. So I mentioned earlier there were 16 African American women in 2005 that were the professoriate. Well, today there are 33. And that's 33 out of about 28,000 engineering professors. So less than, and then when you add that with that's the full professors, the assistant and associate. So at every turn you're by yourself. When we talk about there's a supply and demand part of it too. So if there are not enough people pursuing the pathway to become a professor, then the students can't see the role model that says this is a pathway for me to take. So it's a huge systemic problem, and we've made some progress, but those are some of the initial challenges.
Thank you. Kind of goes back to General Whitecross's mom wanting her to be a school teacher or a nurse. So those are kind of the typical roles, at least from my generation, that women were supposed to pursue, whether you liked it or not. So what is a woman and a woman of color pursuing a degree in engineering? Sounds like she had some challenges too with her own family. So, yeah. General Whitecross, you've expressed the pain of leaving behind your 4-year-old, your 3-year-old, and not even 2-year-old to deploy to Bosnia. It was even more painful to listen to the questions that when people asked you how you could leave the children. Did you always want to join the military? And were you prepared for the questions that you were asked regarding your career choices?
So the short answer is yes. I always thought I'd join the military. I come from a military family. My grandfather, my father, my uncle, and my brothers were all in the reserves. I have 2 older brothers. Growing up, a little bit bossy. I know you find that really hard to believe, but it's a bit of a dichotomy because my father would always give me responsibilities that he would never give my other brothers. To do things, giving it to somebody else. He would allow me to build a new barbecue or things together. And so I had that sense of autonomy already. I like the idea of working in an environment that was hierarchical because it will give me the opportunities to leave early on in a career which you wouldn't get normally. So that was one of the reasons. I thought I would just try for a couple of years and see how it goes. And then I'll be celebrating my 37th year in the military in 2 weeks. So a couple of years turned into a couple more. But in terms of, it was hurtful when people would naturally assume that as a woman in the military, how could I leave my young children at home? And I knew, and I was going to be gone for a year. And my husband was working at the time. And actually, a little story. Can I tell a little story? So, yeah, that's why we're here. So my husband got posted to another city while I got deployed to Bosnia. 3 young children, and my husband is useless when it comes to putting the girls' hair up. So he would bring them to school in the morning, and on photo day, he really got to know all of the other mothers. And he told them all that I was deployed, but none of them believed him. And so he would bring all of the hair stuff so that they could fix up my daughters and make them look really pretty for their photo ops. And because they really were convinced that I was a figment of his imagination. And then when I came home for Christmas that year and actually saw a mother with these children, they were really quite taken aback. Anyways, a little story. But what bothered me the most, I think, besides the fact that as a woman, is my male colleagues. Nobody asked them, how dare you leave your children behind? And it took a while for them to admit to me that you know, but I think it really takes it away from the reality of parenting, that you would never think to ask that of the father, because it hurts them just as much as it hurts us that you have to leave your families behind. I mean, fundamentally, you miss out on some very important moments in your family's lives, those of us in uniform. Those of us not in uniform that end up traveling a lot. Just the normal things in life, and you miss out on them. And it's I think one of the biggest regrets as a military person is to know that there are, you know, whether it's their first day of school, whether it's graduation, whether it's learning how to ride a bike, you miss out on those. But I don't miss out on those any less than all of it. You know, and so I think it's unfair for our colleagues for that as well. But as well, and I could have said no. And I think if I hadn't said no to any department, I would have had to have taken the uniform off. Because as a military member, you're obligated in many ways. Socially obligated, militarily obligated, it's a liability and all that. And I think it's important that you establish yourself as a role model right from day one. And it was important for me to do what would have been asked by anyone. Anyways, that's sort of where I was at that. I just think it's a real disservice on other people.
It's a full package, basically, and it's expected of both men and women equally, absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Admiral Bennett, you are the only man on this panel. And you've already told us that you are here because you believe strongly that every voice should be heard. And so we're very grateful to have you as our Chief of Staff. Thank you very much. But you also represent NATO and ACT. Please tell us what is NATO's position on diversity in the workplace.
Just to take Chris's point, it's absolutely right, the business of the military. That's actually why it's hugely impressive, the respect that we get, especially in the States, of the sacrifice that people live to. I think there is a difference in careers though, and that's not a stereotypical man and woman thing. But I recognise that in the Royal Navy how difficult it is for a woman to repeatedly go back to sea with small children, and we struggle without a doubt on that basis to have sufficient senior women in the Royal Navy. It's something we are doing whatever we can to, and we must. Just on the ACT and NATO, you won't be surprised that the diversity and inclusion policy in NATO is well written. It's huge, and because that's kind of what we do in the Alliance. We write it down in proper form so that everyone can understand it. But it is really good, and it sets a really impressive framework for us to value people as themselves. And yet, if you write it down, it's one thing. As I briefly indicated, I think we all struggle to bring these things firmly to life. Everyone is very busy, and actually being able to talk about diversity, talk about how we value people, is much more important than writing it down. So I think the policy is great, but I would say that, like most organisations, what we have to do, why this conference is so good, is that we're enabling people to place these hugely important issues on the table and give voice to them, so that everyone should be able to talk about whether the organisation is working for them, whether they're male, female, tall, short, or sexual orientation, whatever it might be. The organisation has to work for them, and if it's not working for them, they need to be able to feel able to talk to people about it and ensure that we can recognise that the organisation must change. Not they that don't need to change, the organisation has to change to adopt it. So I think the talking of it is really important. There is quite a lot more education that we need to do in order that we understand what the issues are. This is not about equality, i.e. the same. This is about inclusiveness. And I think that there are still people all over the place that see this as nothing other than some sort of political correctness business. It's far more than that. This is about our ability for everyone in the organisation to be as effective as they are. They can only do that if they're themselves. And then we need to have the ability to be able to tackle things when it's not right, having identified that, and positively take action. All of those are really easy to say, but you will recognise from your own workplaces how difficult they are to do. But my goodness, talking about it in the first instance, I think will be a really good start.
Thank you. One of the things that's coming to mind as you ladies and gentlemen are sharing your experiences, you all come from different life paths, but you also, there's some kind of a common thread that you all share in some way or another. I'm seeing, parallels between all of you. And it's kind of got me thinking. Last week, our gender advisor gave an in-house talk about the differences between gender perspective in military operations and sex. So what is sex? Sex is the XX or XY chromosome, whereas gender is actually the way society sees you and the expectations of society on you. And that changes. So the chromosomes don't change, sex is kind of stagnant, but gender is constantly evolving depending on which country you're from, Bosnia or Canada, or culturally, what is the expectations? Or if you were raised in the 60s, your mother expected you to be a nurse or a kindergarten teacher, school teacher. It's society's idea of who we are and not allowing us to be who we are instead. So with this in mind, I think it seems we all kind of experience this at some point. I'm just trying to imagine the kind of courage that it took to break that mold for Dr. Darden to ask, hey, why are women going in the computer pool and men are becoming engineers when we are fully qualified? How much courage at that time did it take?
Well, it took a bit of courage, but that formula that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, this is kind of a path to get where you want to go. Perceive of yourself in that job, plan what you got to do to get there, prepare, and persist. Well, I wasn't where I wanted to go yet. I didn't think I wanted to spend the rest of my career supporting and doing plots and computer programs for the engineers. And so that was sort of a push to me. It gave me courage to do it. I also knew that I risked losing my job. I was kind of insubordinating and going around the supervisor. And I had said, well, I will go back to teach if I lose my job. I don't dislike teaching because so it did take that courage, and I was willing to face what the byproduct of my going there was had I lost my job because of it. And I believe it was very in large part because I had thought of where I wanted to go, and I wasn't there, and I would rather be teaching than where I was.
So I'm hearing a lot of frustration with not being used to your full potential.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, okay, I get that. I think that's a difficult thing to deal with. Have things changed? I mean, has anybody out here experiencing the same things in the audience? Can I see a show of hands? Anybody felt that kind of frustration? Okay. Is that related to gender or to the circumstance? Any men out there feeling frustrated about the situation they're in? All the men are happy?
Not right.
Okay. Dr. Adams, we'll turn to you. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that change happens very slowly, little steps at a time. Have we made progress? When you look at the students in the classroom, do they face the same concerns as your generation faced?
I think they do. I think for me the change is in the numbers that we're not seeing it. I mean, so I don't want to necessarily flip your question, but when I thought about it, yeah, I think the experience in the classroom is still somewhat the same from what I experienced. But I think also the bigger challenge for us as a society is women are half the population. And in every field other than really engineering and computer science, we are not, our representation is not half. And when you look at it in psychology and medicine and law and all the other fields, women are over half. So when you say have we changed, things are better, but they're not that much better because we still are not in a place where half the society should be, half of engineering should be women. And it's not, right? So then, and some change should be slow, but some change we just need to get on with it. And figuring out what's holding us back from seeing 50% of the students in the classroom as women is a problem. And you know, one of the questions we're going to get to is about the importance of women in innovation. But when I lay that out for you, why that's so important, you'll understand why it's unacceptable anymore that we're still only less than 50%. In engineering, we're producing 21% of people getting degrees in engineering are women, but yet we're 50% of the population. It doesn't make sense.
So tell me, what is the probability of a woman engineer being bypassed for a job because of her gender today?
I can't give you a mathematical number, but I think it's still pretty high.
Oh, really?
And I think it's high in certain settings. All right, so last fall, we went to a group of folks from Hampton Roads, went to New Orleans to look at offshore drilling. We saw very few women in the engineering pool in offshore drilling because of how the environment that they have to live out on the platform. And so I think if you had an equally competent woman and a man, I think there's still some people who would choose the man because they don't want to have to deal with, well, now we put a woman on the platform, we have to have special kinds of things, versus if we put all men on the platform, it's all the same. So, you know, I don't have an article that says that, but the experience, we still hear that that's happening. We still hear, women who are fascinated by cars. Something as simple as a car. Everybody drives a car, right? But when you start looking at who's designing and building cars, still very much a male-dominated environment. So it would not surprise me if a woman went to a car company, we won't pick on any one particular person, and came back and said, I didn't get the job. Because I think the mindset is that you're still not supposed to be here. And so that's why I think I say, when the change is still slow, we have a lot more work.
When we had our staff event, one of our, I believe it was Norwegian soldiers, came forward and told me that they had had similar issues in trying to integrate women soldiers into their workforce. And they had everything separated, women barracks, men barracks, and the tensions were really high. When they just gave up on it and decided, we're raising soldiers, we're not raising female soldiers and male soldiers, they're just soldiers, and they threw everybody together, everything kind of just worked out on its own. So I think that kind of comes to mind with what you were talking about, being on the platform. Nobody wants to be the first one to try that experiment and to put women out there in a situation which may be a bit awkward. But yes, I think women are often in a situation where they are the only female in an environment, not just in the military. So it happens also in the civilian world as well. Many moons ago, I was interviewed for a job. And during the interview, I was asked the question, you do realize you will be the only female in the office? And I hadn't given that aspect any thought at all. And the interviewer asked me, how would you feel about overseeing an all-male environment? So it was my first opportunity to think about it, and I said, well, it seems to be the story of my life. I have no sisters, only a brother. I have no sons, I have no daughters, I have 2 sons. So I don't think it's an issue. I got the job, and I had no issues. The men were all very respectful. But over time, we gradually introduced women into the environment, not because we needed women, but because of their capabilities. And I noticed the office dynamic shifted. There was more balance in the office. And the team complemented each other, I think, better. I definitely think when you have a group of the same gender together, they behave differently versus being in a mixed group. And when we mix things up, I think we create complements that really improve innovation and improve mission success in many different ways. General Whitecross, okay, so I'm sure you've been in that situation many times, probably all your life. Being the only woman in all male environment. You've chosen to be an engineer and in the military, 2 male-dominant career fields. And being in the military, you had to prove yourself both physically as well as mentally. Is there any particular situation in your life that really stands out to you as an experience that you'd like to share with us, where this kind of situation impacted your professional?
It would be disingenuous to say that everything's roses and whatever the expression is, rainbows and unicorns. When I first joined, it wasn't a surprise, I don't think, to anybody that in many cases I'd have to prove myself, being one of the first women in the engineers. In fact, I can remember being the top panel party. I don't know if there are any engineers in the room, military engineers. You build these massive medium girder bridges. They're about 400 pounds each piece. They're like big Lego sets. Big Lego sets, 400 pounds each. And there's a top panel party and a bottom panel party. The top panel party is for the tall people. Yeah, I'm 5'2" on a really good day, depending on my hair. So to put me on top panel party, there was a message there. And I can remember as we were, I could have done, like they had to literally drop it into my arms as these big tall people were, anyways, it's a long story, and I remember at the time thinking, why? And why are those tall people on the bottom panel party? And I really didn't get it at the time because even though I came from what was referred to as a 70s family, we all had our chores at the home. It never occurred to me that I would be treated poorly on purpose, but top panel party for sure. And then shortly after that, I met my very first senior female military officer. She was a major, and in the ranks, major is the beginning of the senior officer cadre, and I thought, I really want to meet her. I really want to get her advice, and I went to her, and she almost destroyed, almost got out after talking to her, because her comment to me was, if you want to make this career, then don't ever get married. Because if you get married, they'll think you're not dedicated. I went, then she says, and if you really have to get married, don't have children. Because if you have children, then they're going to think you're soft. And I was completely deflated. Because I come from a very big family, very big Catholic family. There's 5 of us children. And I've always wanted to be married, always wanted to have a family of my own. And I naively thought I could have both. So in the first 24 months of the military, this is the impression I got. Luckily, I ignored her. And in fact, this is true. I'm the first Canadian military general officer to have had children. I mean, it hadn't happened up to that time. I'm certainly not saying it because, I'm proud of it, but it never occurred to me not to, because I think it's important that we embrace who we are. And when I mentor people now, because of that experience, very first thing I tell, especially young women, is embrace the fact that you're a woman. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, what you bring to the rest of us, no one else can. If we don't understand that at a very fundamental level, we'll never be able to have those innovative, smart, creative thinking that we need in order to be able to get around in this world. The world has changed. We could go off on discussions on this for the next couple hours. So early on in my career, I had 2 options. I could have gotten out and said, this is just not the life for me, or I could have said, no, I want to push this and see as far as I can go, see whether or not we can do what we needed to do. Obviously, the road I took. And then the unfortunate part is, as I grew up in the Canadian system, and then I deployed to different parts of the world, and I realized, like I said earlier, that nations aren't created. People are not created, in my little naive world. And I think it behooves us on every level that we can, that we try to impress upon people through experience, through background, through personal performance, what we are capable of, what we can do. 10 years like this happens.
Maurice, can I add something? Yeah, please do. So it's interesting that you talked about the advice the woman gave you. So I forget what year it was, but it's probably 2003 or 4, and I began to think that I'd like to become a university president someday. And I set out a mission to get to meet as many women presidents as I could. And I happened to meet one who has a science background. I won't say, there's not that many, so I might say what the degree is, you can figure it out. But I was at a conference, and I was so excited to meet this person. And I had an opportunity to walk her from maybe this room, down the hall, down the stairs, and to the front desk, about as far as I got. And so, we always were taught to have your elevator speech ready. And so I said, okay, so Dr. So-and-so, what advice would you have for somebody who wanted to be a president? And a woman who wanted to be president. And, we have this way of sort of dressing people up and down, and so she looked at me like, who are you to think you could be a president? And that might not have been what she was thinking, but that's the look that I saw in her. And it was heartbreaking, because there weren't that many people. And so I guess I wanted to just add that to say the power of people's words when we talk to each other, whether you're a man talking to a woman or women talking to each other. Why would you limit someone? She doesn't know what I could become. They didn't know what you could do. But I think we just have to, when you hear those kinds of stories, we have to remember that make sure that every opportunity that we get, that we don't, I guess the right word, that we reaffirm what people are asking us, as opposed to de-affirming what they're asking us. I mean, I just felt the need to share that with you. I felt some synergy to what you were saying about that. And I was fortunate that I found some other women who were presidents who said, yeah, you can be a president, and we can help you do it. The first encounter with that was, I don't think you could do that. So it's a sisterly moment.
Have you ever had a female mentor?
Oh yeah.
You have?
Yeah, I have plenty of them. But that was just that one thing never left me.
Right.
Just because she was and she still is, a very prominent president. But it was an African American woman. So it wasn't, just everything about it was she was supposed to say yes.
Right.
This is something that you can do. And she missed the opportunity.
But it sounds like you've been lucky. You had a good advocate in your father.
Oh yeah, I'm in my dad's years.
Yeah.
You would have been made out of this. I wouldn't have said anything about it, but no, but when you asked the question about the things facing women and minorities, the second part was about the challenges and
right.
how do you overcome them. My parents raised me to believe I could do and be anything.
That's important.
I mean, I could, there were no limits. My dad he built furniture sometimes around the house, and there was always a tool, a scrap piece of wood, and that's what I think got me, Dr. Darden. I didn't take the doll apart. I took apart my skateboard, and the ball bearings went down the street, and I got a piece of wood, made my own skateboard, but that because that was available to me, I was never limited into what I think I could do. So even when this woman was negative towards me, it didn't set me back but so far, because I'd always been told, you can. I was just looking for someone that could help me figure out the path, how to get on the path,
right,
and navigate where I needed to go.
And that brings to mind, I've heard General Whitecross say that she hates the term breaking glass ceiling. Would you explain why you don't like the term?
Well, first of all, glass ceiling is above your head. Symbolism to me is incorrect. It's like it's always unreachable, and I know that's what it's supposed to mean. But what we're really trying to say is we have to reach so far, and But the fact is, everything is open to us. Everything is open to us. So why does it have to be something above your head? The other thing is, and I've heard many women say this, is that when you break the glass ceiling, there are shards on the floor. And who is sitting there with the shards on the floor? And who is cleaning it up? I mean, who's left behind? Like, I don't like that symbolism. I think beating down doors. I like the violence of it. Going through doors where more than one person can go through at the same time. That it isn't one person going forward. It's a team. It's an effort. It brings in things like humility, teamwork, compassion, strength, all of those things that are important. The symbolism of looking up and having one person go through something that is fundamentally over your head. Works for me.
It's important for you to bring people with you as you move forward.
Absolutely. And not get stuck walking on glass.
Have you ever had a male mentor?
I have only ever had male mentors.
Oh, really?
Well, in that dubious area where I'm the first, and so I didn't have any female mentors, except for my grandmother. My grandmother is from Poland. My grandparents were very traditional wedding, but she, regardless of what kind of ills or whatever thing that she went through, she always told me the same thing, which was, you can do whatever you want. And she had faith in me, and she spent time with me, and she read to me, and she played cards with me, and she taught me how to play bridge. Very difficult. And other people wouldn't do that. So she was the only female mentor I had in terms of believing in myself. But in terms of a mentorship, formalized mentorship, they've all been men.
Admiral Bennett, I'm going to put you on the spot. In your career, have you ever been aware of men purposely trying to disempower women in their positions of authority. And what advice would you give to women? How do you actually become one of the guys while being authentic to the gender to which you were born?
I think I can genuinely say no. That I don't know of a situation in which people have tried to disempower a more senior woman. What I think there is, however, is especially if you're a senior woman like Chris has been, and one of very few, there is a huge expectation, and therefore almost everything you do is scrutinised far more than the men at the same level. And so I think the pressure on women as they get to a level that is at the moment unusual for a woman is huge. And therefore I think that, to a degree, by that scrutiny you may be disempowering because you're watching everything. I think the area that I think we do disempower women, not from authority, but in their careers, is the way that we treat the women leaving the job, having intermission for the childbirth. I think that's something that the military have really have struggled with, and I think the issue, it seems extraordinary that we are surprised that women have children. Because it would seem that it shouldn't really be a surprise, but and I think there's far too much of the time when it actually becomes you're pregnant? How does that happen? What's the difference? Whereas I was just talking to Chris earlier about it. I think what we have to be able to do is recognise that experience is a hugely rich experience, which will enrich in the workplace when the lady comes back, and that we need to be able to treat that period while women are having children, having a break from their career, as actually a positive rather than a career disaster, which I fear that is the area that I would say that we are not good enough yet. I think your second question about the guys, I actually disagree with the question, and I think that I said that I've watched the Royal Navy wrestle with the cultural change of women at sea for a decade, and it genuinely was a decade. During that decade, what we got wrong was that we expected women to become one of the guys. We expected women to turn into men, and so that you would go to sea and you would clearly need to have some tattoos, and you would need to drink heavily, to kick over, and all the sort of thing, the stereotypical men things we would expect the women to do. And whilst I look back on it now, I'm thinking it was extraordinary. It was unsurprising that we got it so wrong, because women didn't feel as though they could be themselves, back to my original sort of thesis. And therefore it was only when the sort of light bulbs came on and we realised that women could be women and men could be men, and big people could be big people and small people could be small people, and everyone had value, that your point around that mix then became a really rich mix, and became the success that it is today. So I think the idea of becoming one of the guys is probably at the heart of actually the ills of how we would see inclusivity in the workplace.
Reinforcing what General Whitecross recently said, it's about being authentic, about being who you are, and being proud of being a woman. And yes, we're different, but it doesn't make us less because we're different. And embrace our differences. There's no need to compete with the men and be one of the guys. So,
that took me 20 years to figure out.
really,
Seriously, it took me 20 years to figure out that could just be what I was. We're a spiritual work, it's okay.
Wow. When it comes to men purposely trying to disempower women, I think that happens, sometimes inadvertently. I think it comes from us not having these conversations and not putting it out there. And so maybe being unaware, it's probably just, we are raising awareness now about having these conversations. I remember the same gentleman who hired me for the job, where it was an all-male environment. One morning I was late for a meeting, and he didn't do this to be mean. He really liked me. He was very proud of my accomplishments. I frequently heard him congratulating himself for hiring me. So I know this was not meant as a stab. He thought he was being funny. But I was late for a meeting, and I called him to say, I have a flat tire, I will be in shortly. So when I walked into the meeting again, I was the only woman into the meeting, and I was supposed to negotiate during the meeting. But as I walked in, he said, so how did you resolve that? Did you stand on the side of the road and weep until a man came to your rescue? And he thought it was funny. He laughed. Everybody laughed. And I was so shocked that the person who had hired me to be a problem solver, to stand up a garage, was even making such a comment. But I know it wasn't meant in a mean way. It was meant, he just thought it was a joke and it was funny. I ignored it, and we just kind of went along stoically, because that's what we did in those days. We just swept those kind of things under the carpet. I think it's also a coping mechanism. If you dwell on it and you try to process it, I thought it might have stopped me from moving forward. So you just ignored it and you kept your eye on the prize. I picked up Dr. Darden making a comment to that point. He didn't focus on obstacles and things that were really going wrong. Is that a generational thing, do you think?
I don't know if it's generational or not. I think I made a comment one time about one of the contractors in the office. I think he had a bad day, but I and a Jewish girl were standing in his office. He had knocked everything off of his desk on the floor, so in a bad mood, and then he looked up at the two of us and said, the only reason either one of you are here is because of affirmative action. And I answered, I said, well, that might be why we were hired, but we sure are doing our job while we're here. And that was sort of the end of it. But there was another incident in which I was writing a computer program about a diaphragm between a high pressure area and a vacuum area. And the engineer had gotten some equations and done several steps in the process of getting them to where I would work with them. And he gave me the equations, I took the equations, I had to figure out how I would solve them, I set up the process, I wrote the code, I debugged the code. When I first got answers, he came in and said, well, no, those answers don't look right. And I said, okay, I'll look at it. So I went through everything I had done, I checked the code, I set it and everything. And maybe I changed one thing I found around, I don't know. But he came back in and I showed him the next set of answers, and he started laughing. And I really got upset when he laughed. And so then I said to him, I said, listen, I've been through this a couple of times. I'm pretty sure all my work is right. I said, can you bring me the work that you did before you gave it to me, and let me check yours? And he brought it to me. And I went through his work, and there was a sign. When we corrected that sign, it corrected the program in the right place. It was right. And I was really upset that he would laugh like that, just kind of in the middle of the audience, where everybody makes mistakes and things like that. But that really bothered me, the way he did that. It not even thinking it could have been his error.
You didn't ask for an apology.
No, I didn't. I don't think I got one either.
That's how things were back then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just how things were. Is it different now, Dr. Darden? I mean, how did the younger generation deal with such a situation nowadays?
So I think that it is. I think this generation of young ladies is, I see them as very bold and very empowered. You know, when I interact with them on campus, and so I think when those kind of circumstances happen, they're just gonna stand up and say, we're just not gonna tolerate that, you know, and that, they'll put their own language to it, but I feel like, and I've got some of my students here, so they're waving, so I think that, I interact with them, and I see them, and they have a different, compass about what they will and won't accept. And I think they're gonna hold people much more accountable, and I think society has given them, some freedom and flexibility to do so. You know, so they're a generation behind me. I'm a generation behind Dr. Darden. There's still, you know, generationally, just some things that you are not allowed to do. But I think in their case, they very much have been empowered. And so I don't think we'll see some of the same treatment that some of the others of us have experienced, because they're not going to tolerate it. And then I think, as a whole, millennials are in a much different space where, you know, they'll quit a job tomorrow and go get something else the next day and not think about it. And, you know, my parents used to say, well, you're going to work somewhere 40 years, you know, and if you leave a job after 3, or why are you leaving after 3? You know, so even that much has changed. I think when you're not afraid to walk away from something, that empowers you to address injustice, inequality, and lack of equity that we see if you're not afraid. But we've always sort of been, you don't give up your good job, so you stay in your place and you don't say anything. I don't think this generation has that compass. They just gonna tell you what it is, and if you don't respond well, they don't find another job.
Well, actually, it's funny that you bring that up, because I've been debating with that. I did watch the movie, and I was very impressed. And throughout the movie, I was watching what these women were going through and what they were accepting. And you know what? I was really glad that they didn't walk away. Because thanks to them sticking it out, we have what we have today. So they created history. They stuck with it. They didn't give up. And that's the question I have for the young people. It's been told to me many times, oh no, that's a toxic environment. Get out, get out. And I'm not so sure that's how you solve problems from running away from them. Sometimes you just have to face them and get through it. Or maybe that's my generational point of view.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I think there's some truth to that there is something to be said for sticking out and fighting. Right? Mm-hmm. But at a certain point, what are the circumstances around how you're fighting? Are you fighting by yourself?
Right.
Are you fighting, you know, are you fighting going up and going down? So it's one thing to be it's one thing to be fighting at my peer level, knowing that the next level up has my back. Or I'm fighting maybe below, but the next level has my back. But if you're the only one in the fight, and nobody else, there's just nobody around with you, at some point you might have to just say, it's time for me to do something different. I can't afford to stay in a situation where maybe I'm not valued or respected. When you get to a point where you're not respected, and then it becomes, maybe are you now counterproductive to what you're trying to do because of the environment. So I don't always see it as it's wrong to run. If you look at it, I don't think about it as running. I think about it as sort of, in some regards, self-protection. Because not every situation can necessarily be corrected. So I don't know.
It's probably also a little bit that society has evolved, that now you do have the freedom to move into a place where you can make a difference. And perhaps from my generation, if you move, or the generation of the movie, if you move, it wasn't going to be very different. That's how things were, because that's how society was, and that was the culture. So you just dealt with it. How many of you kids in our audience would stay and fight through a toxic situation, or how many would just walk away? So first of all, how many would stay? Oh, you'd stay. Oh, that's pretty amazing. Okay, how many would walk away? It's about equal, I think, right? It looks about equal. That's pretty impressive. Okay. So I think it's debatable. It's kind of
Sorry, what if we gave you the competencies to deal with it and the skills to deal with it? Would that make a difference?
But can I ask you a question about that? Because giving them the skills to deal with it, how does that change the environment that they're in? I mean, so
No, to change, well, I meant
so you're saying the coping skills.
the coping skills, but also to deal with it.
Yeah,
To
but
deal with the situations that are at hand so that you can make a change.
But I don't know that every situation warrants that. Or supports that.
No, absolutely. You're not going to be able to change everybody.
Right.
Like they say, there are dinosaurs, and you don't have to be old to be a dinosaur. But I think what we lack right now are those skills to help cope with a situation so that everyone comes out, and that you're a better organization for it. Communication skills, resilience skills, that wholeness that makes you who you are. Respectful environment. My thoughts.
I think there's a serious business case in all of this, which is every business, including the military, need really good people, the best people. If people are not going to stay because of the environment, I think nowadays, I think the point, it was really interesting to see the number of people who stay. That is really good. But actually, I think the people that are going to leave, I wonder whether that is in today's society the way that businesses are going to have to understand that actually that toxic leadership is no longer acceptable, because they're going to lose the quality. And all of a sudden they'll find that their business isn't really working very well because the only people they've got are the people that are not very good, not going to move ever, because they've got invested interest in it, whereas actually the bright people that we want who are absolutely going to have a career and that have left happen. And perhaps that's always the case, but I think also I would have thought that today.
I think we also focus a lot more on communication. I think that's a skill that we didn't give enough attention to in the past. And expressing how you feel and just having this conversation. I think by us sharing our experiences, we are making each other aware, and in so doing, we're making each other more mindful, more considerate, and more able to be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Last week we talked a little bit about cultural awareness, and we talked about how the brain kind of makes these shortcuts, which causes us to actually bias, and doesn't allow you to explore the situation without referring back to the mental model. So that's why the first impressions are so important, because once it's stuck in there, it's kind of hard to break away from. So, women should be home cleaning, cooking, or...
I'd just like to add, though, it takes moral courage to come forth and say something.
It does.
Whether it's in the military or civilian life, doesn't matter. And to take that step, first time, it's a little bit easier to do it, God forbid that there should be, but the second time.
Right.
What it really does is it helps the organization be better. But the moral courage to take it the first time needs to be done, I think, it's still in a very respect. You still have to hold moral high ground. You have to do it in a respectful way. And from that, I think the organization can grow. But it does take effort to do.
Well, and I think that brings me back to Dr. Darden asking why men and women who are equally qualified were not equally employed. I'm not sure that the young people in the audience understand the times that we did that. It's not like today saying, hey, you're just asking a question. It's back then, in those days, it was quite different. It took a lot of courage to do that. And you obviously did it with respect.
Well, I did. The conversation was respectful. When I got ready to go to school at NASA, once I got the engineering job, I said I need to go to engineering school. And that was one of the most fearful attempts I had, because I was, all of my education up until then had been segregated. And I knew that my class was going to be 10, 12 white males and me. And it was, but I decided I'd go ahead. For about 3 weeks, nobody in that class said anything to me. I just went to class every day. But after the first examination, 2 or 3 of them came over and said, "Hey, we just wanted to know if you wanted to join our study group." Absolutely, and that was the end of the problem.
You're my hero.
I think you had also mentioned something like that, Dr. Adams. I read somewhere in one of the articles I read about you that you were not one of the first ones that people picked on to do projects, but you kept your head down, kept studying, and eventually they started calling on you, realizing you had something to offer, right?
Yeah, exactly what Dr. Darden said. When I was in grad school, there was myself and another woman in my cohort, and the 2 of us bonded and were always sort of excluded, and then something came up and we had the best performance grade on the assignment, and from that point forward it was, when we all get together, and let's all be included, because they realized we had something to offer. But initially, no.
I believe in the end, if you give 100% of yourself, it's going to work out. It's all about the choices you make. You can either be a victim or you can be a hero. And certainly, I'm looking at a panel full of heroes over here. Everyone's having their own personal struggles and their own personal journey. But no matter what the struggle is, the rewards may not be immediate. But I kind of always want to believe that good overcomes all, and in the end, it will work out for the best. So with that, I'd like to say to young people, embrace change. Again, there were so many powerful examples in the movie Hidden Figures, and one of them that really stuck out to me was when IBM replaced human computers. What did these women do? They didn't curl up in a corner and go, "Oh my goodness, my whole life is being taken away from me." No, they learned how to program the computers. So you've got to constantly be reinventing yourself as society is evolving and moving forward. And I think just by what you two talk about, putting your head down and proving yourself, I think that's a good way to go forward and to set an example. And you will be included when you prove yourself because of your capabilities. Dr. Darden, tell us, what do women bring to innovation that's different from men?
I think often it's the experiences that they've encountered and things that they have. When I read that question, I actually thought about an instance when we were working a project or something, and the project had been divided into several teams. And the teams often kind of met alone. And we realized that where we were discovering the problems was at the intersection of these teams, where you didn't have anybody meeting, where you didn't have people in the room who saw the issues from one team's side and the issues from the other team's side. And I think that they began to realize that that was needed. And I think this is often, if you've got a different set of experiences, you can envision using something you've seen before work differently than the person on the other team could possibly envision that. And I think that is often what you see when you are bringing others into the conversation, where they're actually have a background that shows them that something else would work, maybe in this area or something.
Dr. Adams, how does inclusion impact innovation?
So, I'm definitely, this is a question I was most excited about. But before I talk about inclusion, let's talk about how you get to inclusion. So, there's a woman who says diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so when you think about it from that perspective, and now you want to ask the question, how does inclusion impact innovation? You have to first understand why it's important to have diversity. You have to have diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of backgrounds and et cetera in the room at the table. Because we all know that from a problem-solving perspective, the more diverse people you have involved, the more solutions you have, the faster you solve the problem, the more money you can save an organization, et cetera. So if you come back to the question about inclusion, just having the people around the table, if they're not interacting with each other, you're not being more innovative, right? So when you get to inclusion and you invite me to dance, now you've got me engaged, and I bring all of my talents and who I am to solving the problem, and you don't get to really innovate if you're not thinking first and foremost about how to be creative and how to bring the totality of who you are. And so when we start looking at women, and particularly women in innovation, women are more empathetic, women are better listeners. So it goes back to something that General Whitecross said earlier. He gave the example about the seatbelts, right? So when seatbelts were first designed, they were designed to do harm to pregnant women because they were restricted. But it wasn't until you had, and they were designed to fit a certain body type, but it wasn't until you had diverse people with diverse experiences talking about the need to have the seatbelt release a little bit and fit different body types that we had better safety. So if you don't have the diverse perspective in the room, you're not including them through inclusion, your innovation is going to continue to lag.
Thank you. General Whitecross, what are the... I think I'm the only one who doesn't know how to work this. What are the three critical elements for innovation?
So I'm going to take that question as innovation through the eyes of a leader. This is one of the things that we talk about at college quite often. But so if I had to tear it down to three, I think the first one would be collaboration, just as you mentioned. But the collaboration to a common objective. So, and collaboration and teamwork with a disparate team that of all levels, all backgrounds and experiences, the diversity of thought and everything else that was just said, but going towards a common objective, learning together and moving in that direction, and realizing that everybody should be heard. Experiences and good ideas don't come with age. So, and being open to that. So that would be the first one. The second one was, which I think we're not very good at, certainly not in the military, is the ability to take risks. And to know that you have to take risks, and when you take risks, that it's okay to fail. That failure is an option. Because even when you fail, you learn something. And I would submit that you learn more when you fail than when you have success. So your options, when you're going through the planning process or whatever, and you're realizing that you failed, what you do is you take it from there and then you move forward. So I think that's the second one. I think the third one, which is underestimated in terms of its value, is humility. And realizing that whether you're a leader, whether you're a team leader or whatever, you don't have the answers there. And that whatever comes about in terms of bringing a group of people together comes from the group, and that doesn't necessarily rest with the person on top. Having the humility to move forward, and having the humility to create an innovative culture that can stand the test of time. And so if I had to tear it down to those.
Thank you. I especially agree with the last one. I mean, sometimes you can learn from the younger generation.
In most cases, I think you can learn more than what you have to learn.
Bring something different to the table. So again, coming back to the diversity and inclusion part about it. It seems whichever way you turn, it's about diversity and inclusion. It seems to be one of the key points.
And respect.
And respect. So, as I said, what do men bring to innovation?
It's a good question. I mean, clearly what they bring is beards and testosterone. Again, I think it's an interesting question, and I might just answer it in a slightly different way. One of the most powerful interventions I've had, as I learned about what how we were going to be innovative was a chief executive of a pharmaceutical company who talked about the fact that this was a huge global, huge thing, and it was. He said that all the money they spent billions and billions of dollars on investigation and experimentation, and the margins were tight. So if they assumed that 10% only of their investment was actually going to be turned into something useful, so that's a huge amount of money that that failed. 10%. If they achieved 9%, they were probably going to go bust. If they achieved 11%, then they were going to make millions of pounds and dollars, I should say. I apologise for that. And he said that when he came to the organisation, it was structured, and they were just about hanging on for 10%. And what he did was broke down the structures, and he placed mathematicians with biologists, with chemists, with lawyers, with artists, whatever it might be. So he broke down the structures. And he said the thing that he was after was serendipity, luck. So he just said that if you place people from all different areas in the same place, you get more luck. And whilst luck's not a really great business approach, he felt that that was the thing that made his company one of the most successful businesses, pharmaceutical businesses. I thought, well, there's the point, isn't it? Because actually we all bring something to it, men, women, but all sorts of different men and all sorts of different women, with all sorts of backgrounds, even non-engineers, can add something to this, I'm sure. And so I don't think it is a question of men or women, just recognising that actually we can all bring something in place in the right position and given the opportunity to spend time thinking.
That's a good perspective. Do you think that men are more risk takers than women? Do women have more restraint when it comes to risk? No.
I think it depends on where they work. And I think it depends on the culture of the work.
So it wouldn't be a gender-based thing?
I don't think so. I think it comes from people.
I really appreciate the audience participation. We have some time for Q&A. So I would like to offer to the floor. We have a mic back there. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and be free to. Okay, way back there.
This is for General Whitecross. The panel can chime in on it. The question I have is, traditionally, historically, most militaries, they had the involuntary and voluntary military. But with what we have going on in the United States of perhaps women becoming part of the selective service, I'm interested in knowing how do you incorporate women into the military, because of the fact of, as females, we're not taught how to, fight, or intuitively there's things that we're better at than perhaps men and women, but it's something that's instilled in men all the time of defense, fight, that kind of thing. And then you draw females into this military group, who maybe never ever had exposure, or their parents, or that kind of thing, but it's going to happen. But how do you integrate women to be successful in the military where this was never traditional?
So that was for me, right?
Yes.
That's a really interesting question. Like, I didn't grow up beating anybody up. Except for maybe my baby sister. But after a while, she got me. Sorry, I was just trying to be funny. But, so the first thing I want to say is that the warfare today is not the warfare of yesterday.
So the conventional war on war, army on army days of the Cold War and the Second World War and all that, to the large extent, those don't necessarily exist today. Now, is there a possibility that it will come? Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. But the reality is today's wars, today's conflicts are different. Counterinsurgencies, they're big versus small, they're cyber, they're done on different planes, not airplanes, but different planes. Sorry. Yeah, that went down like lead balloon. But it's fundamentally different from the past. The threat is different, the security environment is different. And the requirements of today's military are completely different than they were 30, 40 years ago. So in the past where you needed infanteers, for example, that could carry 70 pounds on their back, walk forever, do everything on their own, are kind of over. We don't necessarily require that anymore. They'll go out for a day's patrol and come back to a base camp, for the most part. The kit is better. Okay, so you don't have to carry 70 pounds anymore. And there are still those requirements for doing that, but they don't exist as much. The technological advances of warfare today are far different than they were many years ago, and so we need a difference of opinion. We need a diversity of opinion and a diversity of ideas in order to meet today's technological warfare that weren't existing many years ago. So what does that mean? That means that we need to ensure that whatever we have in terms of the defense, not necessarily all military, but the defense environment of a country, needs to bring in all of the people, all segments of society. And I think that narrative isn't very clear yet. The narrative, I watched, I'm not going to say what country, but I watched a recruiting ad, which this particular country was really pretty happy about. They're trying to increase the number of women in their military. And the only part of this ad where they had a woman doing something what I would consider remotely military was in training when they were doing hand-to-hand combat. She was lying on her back doing this. And I won't tell you what I said. Backwards. But my point is, every single person, like I have something to offer to the military. I have strengths. I'm strong and compassionate. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but I have strengths. All have strengths. And what we do is we bring together what we have, and as a team, we're better for it. And the fact that we're fighting tomorrow's war versus yesterday's war means that we need a completely different set of skills. Those skills from different people, different backgrounds, different cultures, different genders. I think we can't, the panacea of fighting yesterday's wars, we have to take that out of our lexicon. So the idea today that you have to be aggressive and a war-fighting machine to battle, yeah, we still need them. But in the Canadian Armed Forces there are 105 occupations. 105, and only one of them is an infanteer. So that there are so many other opportunities for men and women to come together and for the defense of their country. I think you hit the nail on the head there. We are not doing very well in terms of understanding that narrative and getting the narrative out. I hope I answered your question.
Can I just oh, sorry, you want to come back?
So I think when I'm thank you very much. But being here in the United States, how do you get people to change their paradigm of thinking of when that does happen? Because there's such a stereotype of who goes into the service, what the service does. But how do you start that process of bringing women in and having them wholly accepted? I mean, what would the militaries do exactly? That's what I'm trying to understand, because it's going to happen. You can look at the countries of like Israel. Women have always served. That's part of their duty to their country. So how do we get the United States to accept that and begin the process? I mean, how does that begin? How do you do that?
Well, I think the beginning's already happened, right? So the United States military has opened their occupations. I mean, my aide, I don't know where she is, my EA, there's Bennett. She hates when I do this. She's an infantry officer. Not only is she an infantry officer, she's an infantry officer a very old, well-established organization, and she's extremely talented. And the more people we get that display that and show experience, are treated with respect, the more there will be more people who will want to continue on in those steps. Like, I seriously believe that the future is bright for women, just generally speaking, and particularly in the military, because if you create a respectful and dignified work environment where people know where their boundaries are, left and right arc sort of thing, and you treat them with respect, you give them the skills and competencies that they need to do their job, and then they go out and they do great things, and you reward them for those great things. I mean, that's ultimately where we need to be. Obviously need some work on that. But the first thing is, not unlike what we're doing today, is dialogue. Talking to people. We're doing focus groups in Canada as why women don't necessarily join. And the reason they're not joining is because they don't understand. Their comprehension of what it means to be a military member, as you alluded to, is incorrect. So we need to get out there, we need to better advertise, we need to better articulate what it means to be a serving member. And like I said, there are so many opportunities in the military. You don't need to be at the cutting edge. The fact that if you want to be, you can be. I think this is the way.
If I might say, there are so many role models of extraordinary women in all, certainly in the US services, UK services, and all nations that have women in it. That I think you can have confidence that the women in the military are extraordinary as the men are, and in what they do. One of the bravest people I have met was a young 5'2" medical assistant, female, who in Afghanistan was there ready to do. One of her troop was caught in a minefield, an IED exploded, and was then under fire. She recognised that this man was going to die unless he got medical treatment because he'd lost a limb. She went out under fire, under sniper fire, and stayed with that man until the helicopter arrived, some considerable time, saved his life, without a doubt. Was under fire throughout the time she was giving medical treatment. It's what we expect from all our men and women, actually men and women, really no difference. And I think your question would perhaps suggest that that's something that is not well understood. But I can really give you confidence that it is. The women in the services are extraordinary.
Heidi Adams, I'm your student. With respect to intersectional feminism and general societal progress, there are issues that we're facing now that we haven't thought about 50 years ago. And I'm in a fortunate position that I can be a guide to a lot of students around me, but I sometimes don't feel like I'm doing enough to help for my little person part. I'm not like, a well-known figure. I don't have a movie, nor do I have a doctorate. I'm just a student. But I would like to know, how can someone like me help our future generation coming up? I am very altruistic by nature, and I would like to inspire others, and I like to have other people that I mentor pass that same torch of being helpful and giving to others. And I feel like that would help us progress, but I don't have any ideas to do that.
You asking me or the whole panel?
Just the panel. All of you ladies and gentlemen are doing very well there.
So who wants to take it? What about our chief of staff?
I think by asking the question, you're already inspiring us, actually, by your determination to do that. And I think by having the confidence to stand up and say, yes, I am going to stand up for what I believe, for women, or for engineering, or for whatever you believe in, is something that is already there. So I don't think you need to worry that you won't be able to stand up. I think we all feel, I hope most of us feel pretty modest about what we can achieve. I think what you've seen on the panel are women that have been able to, with their modesty, no doubt, but actually take the initiative and actually show business, have confidence, because I think by answering the question, you already showed that you've got it.
Because I see her almost every day. I would echo what the Admiral said, and I would just add the caveat that, you know, getting you out of school, everything that you have right now, you're doing the right things. The next big step for you is to get you out of school, and that's what you're working on. I think because that gives you a different platform. So right now, I think each person has to serve from where they are, and so she's one of our ambassadors. So she's one of the very first people that students coming to ODU sees, and already you're a role model, right? So you're asking, how do I bring all of who I am authentically and help make a difference? You do that because you serve. You know, you're a leader on campus, you're a leader in organizations, so you're already doing it. The degree is just going to be the next thing that elevates you, because it's going to give you a credential that other people aspire to. And every time you move up, you're bringing other people with you. So, because I know you, I can say that to you, but that's why I wanted him to go first. Somebody else would go first. So it was a little bit, you know, that personalized. So.
I just want to congratulate you. I think just the fact that you're doing that is inspiring.
My question is, I guess, for the entire panel. United States has one of the lowest number of women serving on board, or one or more serving on board. China has more women serving on board by 50%, at least one woman 70%. Canada has 40%, at least one woman 60%. United States is on low 30s, at least one woman 33%. How do we inspire, or how do we persuade our generation to be more participant on boards?
Are you talking about corporate boards?
Yes, sorry.
Well, I mean, I'll start. I mean, I think that, again, our country still has a lot of challenges when it comes to gender equity. You don't get to go just pick to be on the board, you have to be asked. And so if society still sees you as being less than, or not as prepared, or not as qualified, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that there's smaller representation of women on boards, right? And women in the C-suite. We talk about women that are in the C-suite. And McKinsey's done a lot of studies about this, but it comes back to things like mentoring, you know, things back to things around exposure. And so women often say, I don't get there because I haven't been encouraged, whereas a man is oftentimes encouraged. Why is it different in China and other countries? Don't know. I don't live in those countries, but I can only speak about what's here. And I think we're just still living through some legacy issues. And not turning it into a political thing, but just look at where our country is politically. I mean, women are becoming more and more prevalent. That's going to change. We're pushing down the wall. I like to not breaking the ceiling, but we're pushing. But we haven't crossed the tipping point yet. I don't think, in terms of what women can really do and how we're going to be received by our male counterparts, other settings.
And I'd just like to add that there are studies out there that when it comes to applying for jobs and getting your name out and moving forward, men will apply if they're, 80% unqualified, and women will only apply if they're 100% qualified. We got to change that. And I think working together as a group and then sort of feeding off from each other and realizing your competencies and working on your strengths, weaknesses, and all that kind of stuff, and having the wherewithal to put yourself forward and to put yourself out there, that's scary. I think we need to be able to do that. And we need to foster that in amongst all of our colleagues.
We have time for 2 more questions, and we have a gentleman in the second row down here.
Hi. I joined the Air Force when I was 17, and then I got the GI Bill, went to college, became a teacher. Two things I learned in the Air Force was, one, respect authority, and two, you follow direct orders. And after teaching middle school for 36 years, I don't see these kids being able, first of all, the respect for authority is flushed down the toilet, and I just can't envision, not all, but the majority of them ever following a direct order. They question everything, and are you seeing this in the military now, this inability to follow a direct order and the respect for authority?
Go to the Admiral.
Yeah, start with the Admiral.
Well, the answer is that no. But let me just try and qualify that. So firstly, those that absolutely will resist any kind of sense of authority will not volunteer to. Those that are on the margins and quite like it, like the idea of the military, but really don't want to resist authority, may have a go, and they'll either succeed or fail in training. And then of course you're then into the family, which you'll recognise, and there's a way of acting that we expect, and we don't see that there's people that are sort of subverting that authority. I have to say though, just slightly more positively, what we really don't want is people in the military that are simply going to follow orders. This is back to this innovation thing. What we really want is to be able to value difference, value people that are going to challenge this system, but challenge it in a constructive way. Our leadership should not be about barking orders, and I think there's a sense that that's how it is. It's not. What our leadership is about really encouraging people to be on their best and to show how we can change to be better. So actually, we don't want too many. We don't want any people that are just simply following orders. Actually, but to a degree, let's all challenge, but challenge in a constructive way to make the organisation better.
That was basically what I was going to say, and I would just say it makes the organization better when you can do an introspective anyway. So if you're forced to do an introspective because someone is challenging a policy or a directive or something, I think that's good, and that needs to be embraced. But like anything else, it needs to be done in a respectful environment. And like the Admiral said, if you don't necessarily respect people or like follow orders, you're not going to join. The good thing about volunteer forces.
Hello, my name is John Hill. I'm a senior at North State University. This question is really geared toward Dr. Arlene, Dr. Adams. You see a lot of college students that have the aspirations to obtain a master's degree, but not really too many people that want to obtain a doctorate degree. So I just wanted to know what inspires you all to obtain your doctorate degree, and what motivation could you give us college students that have the thought and the aspirations to obtain a doctorate degree?
Well, I actually had some of my supervisors when I did the doctorate degree in the midst of my work, and there were several low points in there, but I actually had my supervisors say, I think you really should continue on and finish this doctorate degree. You might want to go teach at a college when you leave here, and that enhances your ability to do that if you have that degree. And so that was part of that, and my parents actually, I was the one that took the initial step to go for a doctorate, and my mother says, I think you've taken long enough working on this. When are you going to finish that degree? And kind of thing. And so I think those were the things that really pressured me. That I did think that I might want to teach at a university when I was working at that, and that was a big factor.
You said what your major was?
Music education.
Music education. So for me, I think getting a doctorate is a very personal journey. So both my parents have PhDs, and it was not a foregone conclusion that I would get one. I wanted to just I knew I was gonna get a master's degree, but that was not a foregone conclusion. But it's where I saw myself wanting to work and make a difference. And so I wanted to work with young people, but not in the K through 12 schools. So I wanted to work on a college campus, and I did. And much like Dr. Darden, I went back to my undergrad alma mater and tried to get the then dean to hire me to work with him, and he said, "You're too talented not to go get a PhD." And so it was a couple of things. It was one, understanding and having clarity about what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people and make a difference. And then what space that I want to do that in, or if I want to do it in a college community. There are plenty of people at colleges that don't have PhDs, but the kind of things that I wanted to do, I needed to get one. So then it became my motivation, right? If this is a job I want to have, the only way I can really get there is to get the PhD. But you can't go because somebody else wants you. Somebody else wants you to go. You have to go because you want to go, because it's a very rewarding process, but it can be a little tedious. Right? So I would say, if you're already thinking about it, then you need to go. If you ask that question, I can already tell you should go, because that means it's already planted in your head that it's something you should be considering. If you had never asked it, I wouldn't push you to go, but if you're asking it, then my advice would be you should go.
Keep your eye on the prize. Dr. Darden, what are the 4 P's?
The 4 P's, P to the 4th power, perceive of yourself in the job that you think you want. Plan what it is you have to do to get to a job like that. Then start preparing by working your plan, and then persist. Be innovative in finding solutions to the detours or the blockages you run into, and keep pressing on toward that job.
Don't forget the 4 P's. My boss tells me we have one more question.
I think it was one a lady that
Hi, my name is Sierra Hall, and I'm a 30-year-old returning adult student with a modeling and simulation engineering major.
No, yeah.
My question is, there are K through 12 initiatives, and then there's initiatives to get college students to graduate, but how do we get older females, adult females, back into the classroom, more like career switchers, to get started in a STEM field?
Yeah. Let's go to lunch. You're one of my students, so let's go to lunch and talk about it. No, I mean, it's a good point, and one of the things we talk about a lot in higher ed is the alternative pathways, right? And then there are many alternative pathways, and there are a lot of people who, for a variety of reasons, never got on the original pathway, whether it be for college or for a STEM career. It's just a matter of somebody standing up and saying, and we've done a lot of work since I've gotten there around transfer students. We've done a lot of work around women students, recruiting more women students, but nobody's really posed that question to me. And so perhaps there is a population out there we could be looking at that's untapped. Because one of the things that we do know is that there are not enough people in the U.S. choosing to study STEM. So there's a community that we're missing. I absolutely would like to know about it. So if you come see me afterwards, I'll give you my card. We can talk about, you may become the case study that helps us find more people like you. What are some of the nuances that you're dealing with that we can help out with?
I don't know if this applies or not, but community colleges, they have a program through NSF in which they are pushing the STEM curriculum on their students to come in. And I went to a very big conference in Washington this summer on that, and it sounds like they have a tremendous effort in that area. Now, I don't know if that's reaching the students that you want, but certainly they have programs and everything that they help in pushing the STEM for those students.
I came from Highwater Community College.
Okay. Okay.
Well, this concludes our panel discussion. I hope you've enjoyed the discussions as much as I have. I want to thank our panelists one more time. A big round of applause. Our Chief of Staff would now like to make a small presentation to the ladies of the panel on behalf of our Commander, Andre Lanata.
Assistant Director of Labor Relations at Norfolk Southern and Chairman of the Norfolk NATO Festival Board.
Wow, what a fantastic event. Thank you all so much. I feel as though the mean great one, everyone has gone down the stage a little bit there. I stepped up here, so impressive. Thank you so much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, I am Simon Scott, the chairman of the Norfolk NATO Festival. And I cannot think of a better way to celebrate International Women's Day than to spend with such an accomplished group. Just one more short round of applause for you. Their contributions in the area of aerospace engineering, the military, and educating our future generations of engineers is truly remarkable. I have no doubt that each of you have and will inspire a young person in the industry today to do great things. Two of my three children are in tennis today, one of whom wants to study engineering in college, and the other wants to be a firefighter. And I'm confident that she will reach that goal, in no small part because of the example that you all have set before her. You are the vanguard and herald the arrival of many more just like you. Thank you. And for that, we are so grateful. In addition to International Women's Day, we are currently celebrating 70 years of NATO. The greatest alliance the world's ever known is now 70 years old. So thank you to General Andre Lanata, Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, and Vice Admiral Paul Bennett, the Chief of Staff, and the very important part of our panel today. A sincere thank you to all the men and women of ACT for all you do each and every day to keep us safe now and for the decades to come. Your work is invaluable, and we do appreciate how much you sacrifice to make it happen every single day. And to our city officials, elected and otherwise, who are in attendance today, thank you for your support in helping to put this important occasion together. We could not have done it without you. And as always, the staff of the Virginia Arts Festival has been instrumental in putting together yet another first-class event. As a reminder, the Norfolk NATO Festival, it is quickly arriving. The flag raising at the Scope Plaza is going to be on Thursday, April 25 at 5 p.m. That is an impressive event. Please be there if you can. And that's going to be followed directly by the Norfolk or NATO night at the Virginia International Tattoo. And the theme this year, get your tickets by the way, because the theme this year, women in the military. And we are bringing in a dream team, as Scott Jackson would say, a dream team of women who have carved out a prominent place in our military history. It's going to be a fantastic event. A couple of days later, 10 o'clock in the morning, right over there on Waterside Drive, Saturday morning, 27th of April. We're going to be, it's going to have the amazing sights and sounds of the 66th Annual Parade of Nations. It's going to be on Waterside Drive. That's going to be followed directly by the International Village over at Town Point Park. We have a couple of special add-ons this year. On that Sunday, 28th of April, 6 o'clock, the French Army is sending its Pacific rugby team to take on our own Norfolk Blues at Powhatan Field behind ODU. These are enormous Pacific Islanders. These guys, they're huge, they're so impressive. It's going to be fantastic. They're going to do a haka dance for us. It's going to be just a sight to behold. The next day, the World Affairs Council banquet is going to be downtown here at the Main. U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kate Bailey Hutchison, is going to be our keynote speaker. That's going to be an event not to miss. So each and every one of these I've mentioned, other than the tattoo and the banquet for World Affairs Council, they're free and open to the public. So we want you all to be there. And with that, I would say I am finished. We have one more thing to do, and then we are going to go out these doors down to the left for a reception and a good time. So thank you again for being here, and thank you all to the panel. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance here today. Before you leave, just one more thing. We would like to announce the names of the 5 lucky winners who will receive a copy of the book, Hidden Figures, signed by Dr. Darden herself. And guess what? The winners are all women. So the first one is Mrs. Sherita Gordon from Strategic Steps Consulting. Is she here? Mrs. Yolande Harris from USAA. Mrs. Julie Gifford from BECO. Mrs. Deb Higgins from RSA Security. Mrs. Kimberly Kite from the City of Richmond. And Mrs. Frosch from Ashtu Sakti. Please join us now for a reception in the room next door to your left as you exit the conference room. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I wish you a happy International Women's Day.
Does it stay up there? Or once it's done? Well, I mean, like the video, so once it's not live anymore, it's still there to where people can review it and watch it. Did it already go off?
Not yet. It's hit finish at the bottom.